Hi, for anyone new, my name is Jenny and I'm a second year medical student at the University of Auckland. In this video, we are going to be breaking down the 4 papers that you do in semester 2 for first year biomed. I will be going through some tips for each paper based on my experience in 2021. So in semester 2, you only have one core paper, and that is MedSci 142. This is in comparison to semester 1, where you had 3 core papers. The other 3 papers in semester 2 are what we call non-core papers, and that means that they will not be counted towards your admission into clinical programs. Once again, this is my opinion and it can differ from person to person. Cool, let's just get straight into it. Okay, so you have 2 BioSci papers. That's BioSci 106 and BioSci 101. Now I'm just going to group them both together just because they are quite similar in multiple ways. So I'm going to be talking about them collectively, but when I have to, I will make distinctions between each paper. So let's talk about lectures. In terms of the course guide, I wouldn't recommend buying one just because the course guide actually only provides a summary of the notes and the learning objectives for each lecture, so it's not really that useful. If you can, just download the PDF version and then you can annotate it like that. And also the diagrams that are provided in the course guide will be also used in the lecture slides, so you don't need to worry about it. In terms of content, BioSci 101 consists of cells, genetics, and also bioenergetics. And then BioSci 106 consists of topics like enzymes, metabolism, drug discovery and development, antibiotics, signal pathways in the body, etc. In terms of content, there is quite a bit of overlap between the two, so sometimes you'll see that the same thing is taught in 101 and you might not understand that time around, but then when you get taught in 106, you'll be better able to understand it. So don't get too hung up on if you don't understand some certain things straight away, because it might appear in the other paper and you'll know which ones will overlap. So a common question is, do we need to know all the enzymes and all the substrates and products for the Krebs cycle? No, you do not need to know it. You only need to know the important ones, and the lecturer will explicitly say, or the learning objectives will explicitly say, which ones you need to know. So don't get hung up on learning all the enzymes and stuff, because they will tell you which ones you need to know, and just make sure that you're confident in those ones. Now, initially, the names will sound really unfamiliar and also really weird, but trust me, you won't understand it the first time around. But in the lectures, they're going to be continuously saying those names, so then you'll automatically learn it just like that after repeated exposure. So once again, with the BioSci papers, you want to make sure you understand the entire concept as a whole, and then you go and fill in the smaller details. I personally wrote up my notes using mind maps and visual diagrams just so I could see all the connections between concepts, because they do really connect to each other. So I would highly recommend using mind maps. In terms of resources, BioSci 101 does recommend a textbook, and this is actually a pretty useful textbook as well. And not only for lectures, but they assign pages out of it for your lab or your pre-reading for your labs. So would definitely recommend having this textbook with you. Now, another resource that BioSci 101 uses is Mastering Biology. So some percentage of your grade is allocated for doing all the assignments on Mastering Biology, and this is actually a really easy way to get that percentage of your grade. So definitely stay on track, and also the way that you complete the assignments is like really user-friendly and everything. So I personally found Mastering Biology really helpful in terms of supporting my learning. So moving on to labs now. 101 and 106 papers both have pretty decent, chill, easy, manageable labs. There's something about the BioSci faculty where they really do well in creating a friendly atmosphere in the labs. Some of the labs, timing is really crucial, and so because you also get a lab partner in both the labs, make sure you plan out what you're going to be doing before you actually start performing the experiment. So give each other set tasks and make sure it's really clear as to how you're going to make the entire experiment work out, because you sometimes need a stopwatch and then timing 1 minute and then you have to go and run and grab something, and then pipette something into it. It's like, it gets really hectic sometimes, so just plan it out really well. Also, the labs, even though the experiments are hectic, you still do have a lot of time to complete the experiments, so don't stress. Another thing you want to make sure you're doing is listening when the teaching assistant is going through the PowerPoint at the beginning of the lesson, because they basically explain the entire process as well as the theory behind the stuff you're going to be doing in the lab, and that's going to be helpful for filling out your assignment sheet. So in that PowerPoint, the stuff they will be teaching you will most likely be the answers that you have to put down. And sometimes they will stop you in the middle of an experiment to explain like another section of the assignment. And so you might be in the middle of something and then they're talking at their friend. So you have to multitask and be listening, because they might be saying something really important, but also pay attention to your experiment and make sure you're not getting the timing wrong or anything. If you're doing online labs, then they're so much more easier because they give you the data, and I think you only have to do a quiz, and it takes like maximum maybe 30-45 minutes in the 3-hour lab, so it's actually pretty nice. Okay, moving on to exams and tests. So both the mid-sem and the exam for both papers are MCQs. But the MCQs aren't always just straight recall facts. Maybe a couple of them might be, but most of them are trying to assess your understanding. So what they do is they give you actually a scenario, and then they'll give you like a couple of questions for that scenario that you have to answer. So it's not just recalling memorized facts. The good thing about both the papers is that the mid-sem tests will assess you on everything you learned before the mid-sem, and then the exam will test you on everything you learned after the mid-sem. So for the exam, you don't need to remember every single thing you learned from the beginning of the year, and that makes life a lot easier. Last year for BioSci 106, there were actually a couple of questions at the end of the exam that integrated all the learning or all the modules for that half of the semester. And so what they wanted to do was assess you on your overall understanding how each module like interlinks with each other. And last year we were actually the first cohort to actually have those kind of questions. They're not too difficult, but just be aware that the modules aren't just distinct things that you're learning. They do have connections to each other in some kind of way. The reason why they did that was because all the exams and tests in semester 2 were online, so they had to make it some way kind of harder for us. That's it for BioSci 106 and 101. Let's move on to Physics 160. This is a paper that a lot of people have really mixed opinions about, and also a lot of people going into biomed are always really scared about because it's physics. My answer is no, you do not have to. It is not compulsory, okay? But I would recommend that if you do enjoy physics, take it up to level 3. If you don't enjoy physics, then do not force yourself to take it up to level 3 and sit through 1 or 2 years of being bored in classroom if you don't like it. So the benefit of taking it to level 3 is that when you come into Physics 160, the topics that you learn, such as mechanics, electricity, and a bit of waves, they are topics that you do cover in Physics 160. So if you learned it already, then it's just like a recap, right? You don't need to spend too much time worrying about the content. You just need to do a couple of practice questions and you've got the basic concepts down, which is good, because in Physics 160 you have, I think, 3 new topics or modules that you learn. So you have thermal physics, optics, and also medical physics. And so I would say for Physics 160, the 3 topics that you don't learn in high school are the hardest topics, because 1, they're new to you, and 2, they do require a lot more understanding and conceptualization. So that's the thing. If you've nailed down the basics that you learned in high school, then you can spend more time worrying about what is new and what is more difficult. But at the same time, if you didn't take physics, then yes, you will have to do a bit more learning. You will have to make sure that you are up to date, but it's not too hard because you don't learn everything that you learned in high school in Physics 160, if that makes sense. You only learn a select few concepts, and they're pretty simple, and the lecturer is awesome. He makes sure that you've nailed it, basically. In terms of resources, the textbook is so good. Highly recommend using the textbook because they teach you the concepts, but they also give you so many practice questions. And the thing about physics is practice, practice, practice. You have to do so many practice questions to actually make sure you understand what you were taught. Because you can be so familiar with the content and you can read through your notes and be like, yeah, I understand this, but then you come to a question and you're like, how do I put my knowledge into like solving a mathematical equation, you know? So practice is key, and the textbook really helps with that. I used it so much. I would say do all the practice questions that they give you, 1 in the course guide, 2 on Canvas, and 3 in the textbook. And do those practice questions straight after the lecture or 1 or 2 days after that lecture, because that way you will fully understand and consolidate the learning. Also, the mechanics lectures are so fun because the lecturer does these real life practical experiments in person, and it keeps you engaged so much. Moving on to labs. I really enjoyed the physics labs because they were really collaborative. You worked in a group of 6 people, and in the room you had tables everywhere and then 1 or 2 groups to each table. But the thing is, you could basically go up to any group and ask how they were going, ask for help, check out what their experiments looked like, and it was just such a collaborative environment. And all my friends were in the same labs as me in semester 2, so I was just like annoying them the entire time. But it's great. It's a great time. The labs are pretty chill as well because they don't require too much effort. Even the first lab, they basically give you full points if you attempt all the criteria stuff that they put in. So they don't take too much time, and I think they really toned it down to previous years, which is good. The practical investigation is kind of like the one in level 2 or level 3, but much easier. So they basically give you marks based on 1, the format of the assignment, so is it clear to read, are there headings everywhere, and then 2, the things that they include in the marking rubric. And there's usually only like 3 bullet points in the marking rubric, so you can see that's quite simple, and they just want you to basically get straight to the fact. So I think the page limits for most of them were 2 pages or 3 pages. But to be honest, like the data tables for Excel took up most of that space. In terms of physical writing, there wasn't much. Once again, listen to the instructor because they will make sure they tell you what you have to have in the report, and also check on Piazza whenever you have any questions, because if you're confused about something, most likely someone else is, and the chances of it being on Piazza is quite high because everyone is interacting on there, especially like a couple of days before the assignment is due. Everyone's like asking questions, so it will definitely be there. Moving on to exams and tests. So both the test and exam is MCQ. Because it's MCQ, don't think it's easy, because what they do is if you have, let's say, a couple of steps in working out, yeah, and you get 1 step wrong, they will predict the common way that students get questions wrong, and then they will put down the answer as an option when you follow through with the working. So if you made that mistake, then you will get an answer that is on the MCQ, and you'd be like, oh, it's there, that must be the answer, but they have purposely put that answer there to trick you. So it is MCQ, but it's still hard. I would highly recommend to try and score as much of your grades through your labs and also your tests, because the exam, it covers all the content, and so it is a lot of content to understand and also to be able to work it all out in, I don't know, I forgot how long the exam is, but it is quite hard. So try and score as much as you can in the labs and the midsem tests so that you don't suffer too much in the exam. One more thing, and I know I've said this before, but literally do every single question that you possibly get in Physics 160, because okay, for the first 2 or 3 times when you do a question, yeah, the concept doesn't click and you have to look at the answers, but that's fine, because maybe the 4th or 5th or even 6th time that you come across the question in an exam paper, you'll see a pattern. You'll see a pattern in the working out, and sometimes it's just that you need for a concept to click like that, you know? So just do as much practice as you can for every single concept, and you will then fully understand it, hopefully. Cool, let's move on now to MedSci 142. MedSci 142. Now this is probably another paper that you would have heard so many things about. Most commonly you would have heard that it's super hard. And yes, it is super hard. That is because it is probably the most content heavy paper that you will do in biomed. But in saying that, if you do like MedSci 142, in terms of what you are learning, then you are most likely to enjoy medicine. It is the toughest first year paper, but it's also the most interesting. But in terms of the course guide, it is free. In terms of you don't have to pay extra cash, you only paid for it in your course fees. Anyways, yeah, so you will have to pick it up one day in semester 2. It has all the images, diagrams, learning intentions, some notes that you need to know. If you've survived Sem 1 and some of Sem 2 memorizing facts, you will not be able to survive this paper just purely memorizing. You have to understand the concepts well. In terms of the textbook, it's the same one as BioSci 107 in semester 1, so don't need to worry about finding another textbook. Sometimes they tell you to do pre-readings for the labs using the textbook. So in terms of resources, you have a platform called CuraCloud, and what they do is they basically put up after every single lecture a couple of activities that you can do, so like fill in the blanks, match the following, a couple of short answer questions after every lecture. So straight after the lecture they would do the CuraCloud just to see if they did understand anything in the lecture, and then they base the learning off what they got wrong. Moving on to labs. MedSci labs are known to be the most interesting labs because they consist of dissections and also looking at models, so they're quite full on. How you are assessed in the labs is through a MCQ quiz at the end of the 3 hours. It's usually 10 questions long, and it's timed, and it's also closed book. It basically tests you on what you learned in that lab. If you do not like dissections and stuff, then that's alright because you are not assessed on the dissection. So you can just sit there and watch the teaching assistant do it on the screen. You do not have to partake in it yourself. But it does help you a bit more, I would say, if you did physically do the dissection. Also, the MedSci labs are in Grafton, so try and maybe pick a timetable where you don't have to like run from the city campus to Grafton in like 10 minutes, because that's kind of insane. Don't do that. So pick a good timetable so that you do have space, a time to get over to the Grafton campus. Finally, exams and tests. Now the MedSci 142 test is MCQ, but the exam is short answer question. This is one paper where both the test and exam are pretty hard. Even if it's online, it's still hard. And that's because they really do not assess you at all on straight recall facts. It's all your understanding. And you will be exposed to things that you might have not directly been exposed to when you were learning MedSci, but indirectly, you should be able to link to different concepts in your head and then answer the question, if that makes sense. In my year last year, the exam was actually online, and you could definitely tell that they changed kind of the format of the paper, because previously there was a lot of like one-worded questions or match the following questions, and then last year in the online exams there was a lot more full short answer cues, a lot more writing that you had to do, which made it in a way a bit harder because it meant that you were more time pressured. I would recommend to do practice papers early on. And by early on, I mean like really early on. They also give you these MCQ questions at the end of each module. The best way to go about answering questions is, for the MCQs, what you want to do is, yes, find the correct answer, but don't just leave it at that for each question. You want to go back and look at the answers that are wrong and fully explain why it is wrong. Because you can just read through the question and be like, oh, that's wrong because of this is wrong because of this, so this must be the right one. But don't just do that. Go through and write down, maybe in short bullet points, why it's wrong, because that makes sure that you will fully know your content, and also helps with your understanding. Now, Piazza will really help you with MedSci 142 because a lot of the learning and a lot of the understanding happens through reading through the questions that people ask on Piazza, because the TAs, the lecturers, the course coordinators are all actively answering questions on Piazza. So go on there and maybe search in a keyword that you are not too sure about, and then go look at the questions, and there will be like sometimes full in-depth responses from the TAs about it, which is awesome, because just read that and then hopefully you'll get a better understanding. Honestly, it is a hard paper, and everyone does find it difficult, so once again, you're not the only one. And also, you might feel as if it's really common to like go back halfway through your course and realize that you've forgotten a lot of the earlier stuff. So people really liked using Anki, which was a flashcard kind of program. I never used flashcards in first year just because I actually never was a flashcard person, so it's up to you. Try it out, maybe it will work, because it's like spaced repetition and active recall, and those two really help to interrupt the forgetting curve, and so leads to long-term retention. So have a go at using Anki. If you don't like it, then that's completely fine. Maybe there's a better way that you'd learn. But yeah, it is a difficult course. You will get there in terms of understanding the content. It just takes quite a bit of time to grasp stuff. So yeah, that's it for the breakdown of semester 2 of first year biomed. One thing I just want to briefly touch on before I finish the video is going into semester 2, because there was only one core paper, what was the strategy for some people was to focus purely on MedSci 142, because that's the paper that actually counts towards clinical programs, and then just like, pass or do like average for the 3 non-core papers. I wouldn't really recommend that, just because your non-core papers do still contribute to your GPA. It's called your cumulative GPA. And so what happens is, in the unlikely scenario that you didn't get into your clinical program and you want to continue down, say, continue your Bachelor of Science, or you want to go into another degree, that grade can determine whether you get some scholarships or whether you can continue down some specific research pathways, etc. So you don't have to do like amazingly well, but just bear in mind that you do want to keep your doors open. That's it anyways. Hopefully you found it beneficial and you are a bit more prepared to see what is to come in semester 2. If you do have any questions, feel free to comment them below and I'll answer them. But other than that, you can also comment down below if there's any other videos that you want me to do for biomed. But other than that, I'll see you in the next one. See ya!